Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this Governors for Schools webinar. The focus of this morning's webinar is the Schools White Paper that was recently published, and we're coming at it today specifically from the angle of its implications for school governance. My name is Steve Barker, and that's me on the left-hand side of the screen, and together with my colleague Linda Waghorn, who is on the other line. Good morning, Linda.
Good morning, everyone.
We're here from Better Governor, which is a strictly education digital platform supporting governors across the country. And we're delighted to be with you and hosting this webinar on behalf of Governors for Schools this morning. We're going to try and get through a reasonable amount of content this morning. So contrary to what we put on the billing, we won't be using any polls this morning, but please do use the question facility, and we'll do our level best to be able to respond to those as they actually come in. What we're going to try and do in the webinar is explore some of the content of the white paper, but coming at it predominantly from that strategic perspective of what are the medium and long-term implications for us as school governors here. So we are going to review the school's white paper. We'll reflect the key themes from that, and as I say, focusing on those implications, but we also want to perhaps put a little bit of update on that in light of the Queen's speech and some of the associated papers that have been published earlier this week on that in terms of a draft schools bill, amongst other things. So with no more ado, we'll get off, but please do, as I say, questions important. This is your session, so any questions or comments as we're going through the session, then please do put those onto the panel, and say we'll answer those as we go along. So we'll start off with focusing on the white paper. This is what it looks like. It's called Opportunity for All, Strong Schools with Great Teachers for Your Child. And you can see on the front cover itself, that title is For Your Child. And I think that's actually quite significant because that raises the question of who the intended audience is. And quite clearly from the department's perspective, from the government's perspective, there is an implication here that parents and carers of school-age children and young people are certainly part of, if not the sole audience here. And throughout the white paper, what the government have done is put quite a lot of little sort of captions throughout it, which we're going to be sharing with you this morning. And they're really focusing on coming at the white paper from the perspective of how it helps children. So we'll explain a little bit more as we go through, but what we're going to do is follow that up with perhaps rather than our usual questions for governors to ask, what we're going to say this morning is what are the implications for governance? As I say, we'll explain a little bit more as we go through it. So you've got a screenshot of the white paper on the left-hand side of the screen there, published, as many of us will be aware, on the 28th of March. And I think it isn't insignificant that it is the first education white paper for 6 years. Obviously, we've had the pandemic, etc., but it's been a while since we've had a white paper. And the white paper, of course, usually is the forerunner to legislation. It is supported by 3 additional publications. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. And the white paper itself has actually got 4 key themes to it, which the government are referring to as chapters. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. But just by way of an introduction, I think in terms of the context of the white paper, it needs to be seen, and certainly the government makes no secret of this in the preamble to the white paper. This is very much part of the government's so-called levelling up agenda or strategy. And the 2 key headlines, which the government are saying will be the measures of success for the white paper, hence the comment at the bottom of the slide there. Firstly, by 2030, the government is actually saying that they want 90% of all children, when they leave primary school at the end of Key Stage 2, to reach the expected standard in reading, writing, and mathematics. Now, many of you, if you're in the primary sector or even in the secondary sector, will be very well aware that's something of a quantum leap from where we are right now in those subjects. So that does imply that quite a lot of work has actually got to be done, but nonetheless, it's an ambition, and that's the way it should be seen. And in parallel to that, of course, there is a similar ambition from a secondary school perspective. So again, by 2030 as the target date, what the government wants to see is an increase in the average GCSE grade in both English language and maths, from where it currently is at between 4 and 5. They actually say it's 4.5, even though that's not a grade itself, up to 5, which is 1 grade, obviously half a grade higher. And again, that's quite a leap from where we are at the moment. But the Secretary of State himself actually described these as measures of success, as I said a few moments ago, for the basically all of the intentions, all the ambitions contained within the white paper. So, as I said a few moments ago, there are 4 chapters, as the DfE is referring to them. The first one is headed An Excellent Teacher for Every Child. And what we're going to do is come on and explore these 4 chapters in a little bit more detail in just a few moments. Then we have Delivering High Standards of Curriculum, Behaviour and Attendance. The third is Targeted Support for Every Child That Needs It. And the final one is A Stronger, Fairer School System. And that's the one that probably most people were fully anticipating. It's the one about perhaps a slightly faster move towards a totally academization system. But I think it's fair to say at this stage, when Linda and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, we both agreed there are no real surprises in the white paper itself. There's a lot of restatement of existing or previously made ambitions and promises by the government, and a lot of confirmation of things that are actually in process or in progress at the moment. The devil is always in the detail, of course, and that's what we're going to explore in the next few slides. So first of those chapters, An Excellent Teacher for Every Child. Some of the key points I think to note from a governance perspective here is that there is, I think most people are happy to agree, something of an issue at the moment in terms of recruitment and retention of school teachers in England. And the government is actually committed that by 2024, so that's a very short turnaround time, there will be an extra 500,000 teacher training and development opportunities. Yeah, that's quite a significant increase, and obviously if that comes true, that could have a significant impact on the situation that we have in our schools. And I think many of you will be aware that following the publication of the white paper, there was a survey by the Times Education Supplement, I think, that ran it, saying that at least 6 out of every 10 teachers had intentions to actually leave the profession within the next 5 years. And obviously that's a little bit of a warning bell, to say the least, for our schools and trusts, and it's something that as governors we need to be very mindful of. Government is actually backing that up by a raft of additional measures in terms of its professional qualification or national professional qualification programme. And the first of those is a new NPQ, as it's often referred to, in leading literacy. Now, again, coming on that theme of no surprises here, there shouldn't really be a big surprise here. Yes, this was news, but of course we've known, at least for the last 3 years or so now, that the drive on literacy has been perhaps more sharply focused in the recent Ofsted inspection. Deep dives on reading are very much commonplace. They're to be expected in every single primary inspection. And one of the schools that I chair, a secondary school, large trust, was inspected on Tuesday and yesterday, and we had a bit of a deep dive on reading as well. So, this is definitely part of a national strategy, being backed up by the development of a new qualification there. And similarly, similar theme here, government drive at the moment with the new early years curriculum that was actually introduced in September last year, very much putting a focus on early reading and early numeracy as the 2 foundations for all learning that children and young people ultimately end up doing. They're certainly the gateway into getting into a much deeper and more advanced level of the curriculum. And to back that up, the government is actually introducing national professional qualification in early years leadership, and also following that up with an investment of £180 million for training other staff who can then support early literacy and early numeracy within that early years, of those early years settings in our schools.
Steve,
And sorry, Linda.
There's a question on the question panel about if we know when those qualifications will start and if there's anything additionally there for secondary in terms of the NPQH qualifications itself on literacy, because you mentioned secondary.
Yeah, no, there's no indication at the moment, but again, there's nothing that says it won't apply to secondary as well. I think what we need to, the devil is always in the detail on this one, and I think we need to wait and see what it says. There's nothing in the draft bill that was announced in the Queen's speech about this, so I don't think this is actually going to come through legislation. I think we will see these things just actually happening because all they require is funding and to be set up through the appropriate channels in the same way that the other national professional qualifications are. So I think we will see these just be drip fed into the system as time moves forward. But certainly the implication is that these are not dependent on a 2030 deadline. These are actually going to happen a lot more quickly than that. And then the final bullet point on this slide is the reiteration of the government's commitment to raise the starting salary for teachers up to £30,000. And I think everybody will be aware of that. This has been batted around for quite some time, at least a couple of years now. And obviously what that means is that there are implications that we don't know at this stage whether it's actually going to be fully funded for schools, and obviously there are budget pressures to say the least at the moment, not least of all because of the fuel crisis, etc. But it will be interesting to look at what that means going forward. And the government is also talking about additional incentives for schools most in need. What that means is that in those specific areas of the country that have actually been identified as the worst performing academically by the government, there will be some additional incentives for teachers to join the profession there. We already have the strands for maths and science teachers, etc. It's those sorts of programs that I think we're going to see used increasingly, but also perhaps more specifically targeted now than that they have in the past. I can see that David's put a question on the panel too about, sorry, didn't mean to do that. David had put a question on the panel about the percentages of youngsters currently getting reading, writing and maths and primary school. The objective is 90%. It's below 80 at the moment. I think obviously we've not had results as such for the last few years, but from memory, I think the average is something like 77, 78% at this point in time. Okay, let's just move on to the next slide there. As I said, what we will do for each of these chapters, as the government are calling them on the white paper, what we'll do is come up with on-screen just snapshots of the captions that the government has used in the white paper, which are coming at it from the perspective of what does it actually mean for children and young people in our schools. So the first one on the excellent teacher for every child is that what the government is aiming for is that every child and young person in our schools will be able to say, I am taught by highly skilled teachers, developed by world-class initial teacher training and an early career framework. Now, again, that's a nice ambition. We're very much in that situation at the moment. The world-class teacher thing is something that the government actually has some ambitions on as well. Current and aspiring early years leaders at my provider just means school or setting, of course, complete the new early years NPQ, National Professional Qualification, and the quality of teaching I receive improves. Again, very much in line with that government commitment as it stands at the moment to improve the quality of teaching. And of course, a lot of schools are very much seeing that through as a prime objective in their school improvement or school development plans right now. And then you can see the one that, sorry, I pulled two up at a time, bottom left there. My school has a trained literacy expert. And again, coming back to that question, it doesn't say primary school here. So I'm assuming, although we can't confirm it because it doesn't actually say, my school does have a trained literacy expert who's completed the leading literacy NPQ and is improving literacy teaching across the school. So again, it doesn't imply that that's limited to primary, but we'll have to see what that looks like. And then the last one, okay, my school can more easily recruit trainee teachers attracted by the new starting salaries of £30,000. And I think there was a question, or there's several questions on the panel at the moment about where it is right now, depending on where you are in the country. And I know we have quite a number of you joining in the London area. London waiting is the highest salary. That's just below 30 at the moment, going down to through the fringe and outer London areas rather, and then the fringe, and then the rest of the country. The starting salaries are anything from 24,000 up at the moment, but there's still quite a jump up to that 30,000 for quite a few parts of the country. We've got some very specific questions on the panel in terms of implications for perhaps specific types of teachers, those working with children with special needs, PGCs, etc. That level of detail is not contained within the white paper, I'm afraid. I think that we'll just have to wait as time goes on to see what that actually looks like. So, as I said, what we're going to do on each of these chapters of the white paper is follow this up with some implications for governance. A lot of these are perhaps calls to action, some of them are questions, but a lot of the things that perhaps we should reflect on and think about. Is this going to be discussed at board level within our school or our trust, and what are the implications as far as school governors are concerned? And the first one linked to that first chapter on excellent teachers is all of us need to think about where are we at this point in time in terms of recruitment and retention. Some of you will be aware that there are some very significant issues on recruitment and retention. It's very difficult to find teachers at the moment. Certainly experience one in some parts of the country. That may not be the case where you are, but nonetheless we have to think about that and think about some of these reforms that are actually being talked about at the moment. Will they impact that situation? Will they improve it? Will they make a difference as far as our schools are concerned? And I think that vision of improving the supply of newly qualified teachers, or early career framework teachers, as we're supposed to refer to them as now, is that realistic that that can be completely in place by 2024? And again, thinking about that survey that says about the intentions of quite a lot of teachers to leave the profession at the moment in the next 5 years, we do need that absolutely as an imperative. And then the other one to think about, I intimated towards this a few moments ago, the budgetary impact of that 30,000 starting salary, because of course it's not just the starting salary for early career framework teachers that has an impact on us as schools, but it's then the differentials, the movement up the pay spines, etc., because all of those will have to move as well. The government intention is that to make the profession more attractive by upping the starting salary, but unless there is clear progression, which of course does exist in the system at the moment, that all has to move up a notch as well to actually make it attractive. And that has implications, because at this stage we don't know how much, if any, of this is actually going to be funded by government and how much is expected to come out of school budgets. And that brings us on to the second chapter. And the second chapter, as you can see on this slide, is called High Standards of Curriculum, Behaviour and Attendance. So this is probably the most complex of all of the chapters. There's a huge amount of information in here, and what we've tried to do is summarise it on a single slide here. We'll give you a few additional bits and pieces as we go through. But the first strand of that, high standards of curriculum. Curriculum has obviously been in the spotlight since the new Ofsted framework came into place. And we've seen lots of schools going through quite a few curriculum reviews and quite a lot of restructuring and replanning of the curriculum. What the government is actually now promising is the creation of a new curriculum body that will work with the teaching profession, that creates what they are describing as free, optional, adaptable digital curriculum resources. The idea is that many of you will be aware of the Oak Academy that was created at the beginning of the pandemic. Oak Academy, funded by central government, put out a lot of lesson plans, some of them in quite a lot of detail for a whole range of different year groups and subjects. The idea is that the Oak Academy will work very closely with this new curriculum body that's going to be established. It doesn't say, but the implication is ultimately it may well be subsumed within that. But also what it will do is bring together the research-based approach that has been adopted for many years by the Education Endowment Foundation, so that we are moving into a new era, I think, where an awful lot of curriculum development now will be predicated on research of what works, what's truly effective in bringing about improvements in children and young people's learning. The second strand that we have there, richer, longer average school week, making the most effective use of time in schools, ensuring children enjoy a rounded education. Now, this is probably the one that caused, greatest interest, beyond the academisation strand when the white paper was first published. The average school week at the moment varies tremendously. Some of you will sit there and say it makes no difference to us. Others will be wondering quite what they're going to do, because the minimum school week is going to increase from September next year, September 23, to 32.5 hours. Now, for some schools, particularly perhaps Key Stage 1 only schools at the bottom end, some of them are not quite reaching that at the moment. Others have no difficulty at all. And despite the fact that the government has actually put in that second bullet point there, and again, all of these are quoted directly from the white paper, children enjoying a rounded education, the 32.5 hours is teaching time. It does not include after school clubs or breakfast or any other form of wraparound care. So schools do have to carefully calculate how much of the school day does actually contribute to that 32.5 hours amount. It does include break and lunch times, by the way. And then the last strand on this slide is relating to the second and third strands, behaviour and attendance. The government want to continue to drive behaviour. It fits in with other government policies, of course. Behaviour, I don't think, is quite the issue that, this is a personal view, in our schools that perhaps the government believe it is, but certainly behaviour and attitudes and the impact that has on attendance and vice versa, of course, is something that's an issue. So there is very much at the heart of this a drive to improve attendance. We've seen an awful lot of activity over the last few months to highlight some of the legacy issues from the pandemic and the partial school closures, etc., where we haven't seen or haven't enjoyed the same levels of attendance that there were pre-pandemic. So that's something that lots of schools are working on at the moment. There's been Ofsted research, and there's a lot of reading out there on the subject, and it's certainly something that should be high on the agenda for all governing boards at the moment. Government are talking about the creation of a national database, which actually helps from a national basis actually focus where the hotspots of poor attendance are. There's going to be an annual behavioural survey, no further detail on that at all at the moment. And then the national data system is, the idea is that others can access it as well, including external agencies, so that where there is a call to follow up on perhaps persistent absenteeism in school, they can more easily access data. And fair to say, there is also going to be a fully funded scholarship, again, a national professional qualification in behaviour and school culture, which will be supporting this. But again, no additional information on that at this particular point in time. And then what this means for children and young people, the little captions here. Interesting, the government have actually put here, the one at the top is actually the sort of minimum school hours. So my school offers at least the new minimum of 32.5 hours, which could mean extra time for English, maths, sports and arts. Again, it doesn't look as if that's actually going to be stipulated or ring fenced in any way. And I think the significant word there is could in terms of mean. The reiteration that all schools are going to be inspected by 2025 is recognition that, of course, there are still quite a lot of schools who were last judged as outstanding when they were last inspected. no longer are they exempt from inspection. So the government has reiterated that commitment that by the end of 2025, every single school in the country will have been inspected under this current framework. The next one, my school publishes a new attendance policy and my teacher gets funding for behaviour and culture, MPQ, meaning I learn better in a calmer, more orderly environment. I'm not sure I learn better is actually grammatically correct, but that's not my words, that's the government's. But again, you can see all of these are being turned around into what it would look like from a child's perspective, a child or young person's perspective. And then there's a broadband commitment one there, which does affect some parts of the country. And then the flip side of that, for those that specifically impact on the curriculum, again, nothing significantly new here. There's a couple, obviously, there's the existing reforms in early years, plus those national professional qualifications there. Tables check exists already for year 4 children. Phonics screening check redone in year 2 if children don't actually meet the required standard in year 1. That's been in place for many, many years. And then there's a reference to that new curriculum body. Interesting, there's a nod there on workload. Of course, it's with the last part of the sentence there, reducing the time they, meaning teachers, spend on planning. So something there in terms of workload, but I think we do have to think about the workload implications there, which brings us neatly on to the next slide, because as far as the implications are concerned here, we have to think about the role of this new curriculum body. Nothing at the moment says any of it is actually going to be compulsory or a statutory requirement, but there will be implications, and of course they could be Ofsted-driven implications of that curriculum review. And again, given all the work that probably virtually every school in the country has undertaken on the curriculum in recent couple of years, etc., there are some workload implications here, because it's not as simple as just downloading something from the internet. That then has to be planned to meet the needs of individual children in the classroom. So I think there is a workload impact potentially there that as governors we should be mindful of. On the subject of attendance, as I say, there's been a lot of research, a lot of guidance come out. What we've now got is a document that was actually published just this week called Working Together to Improve School Attendance. And as you can see, it's got the published May 2022 date on it. Comes into effect from September this year. Don't want to go into too much detail about this morning, other than to just flag up, if this isn't on the agenda in your school this term as a governor, you need to make sure it is, because it does have some serious implications for the autumn term in terms of what those expectations are, what schools must do. And I think from my reading of it so far, I would say that generally the message coming from this document is that this is very much putting the burden on attendance onto schools and perhaps taking it a little bit away from parents. So it's far more of what are schools doing and what are schools being held to account for doing or not doing is the case than perhaps has ever been the case before. So, as I say, something certainly to actually think about there. And at that stage, I'm going to hand over to Linda, who's actually going to talk you through the next few slides.
Thank you, Steve. So this element then is talking about a wider variety of targeted support for those children who, for one reason or another, find progress in their learning more challenging. So this document, written to parents, addressed to parents, includes a parent pledge, and this is an interesting notion that what they're saying here is we're going to, as a government, give you a pledge and then expect schools to provide all of these things that are in the pledge. So this is about trying to ensure that there is consistency. So going back to that levelling up that Steve mentioned right at the beginning, and that we hear so often as a term, this is about making sure that every school is using some kind of evidence base that is based on research of what actually works. So the first of these pledges on this slide, for those children that find their learning more challenging for whatever reason, is to support those children who for one reason or another are falling behind in English or maths. Now, some of that may be recovery from the various problems of the pandemic. Some of that may be our pupil premium children. Some of that may be children who have had chaotic or difficult circumstances, or have some other problems that have arisen or are part of their makeup. So it's a wide range of children. We're not just talking about one group, but we would all recognise these children as vulnerable for one reason or another. And in your schools, you will know which are your vulnerable pupils. And they will include now those children who may be behind in their learning for no other reason than the pandemic. That's the newer group, possibly. The pledge here is also to extend the tutoring courses and make sure that in 2024, the success from the research of what works, so small group tutoring, one-to-one tutoring, seeing that as something that has very much been part of helping children to catch up or improve in their learning. This is seen to become part of a permanent feature of the school system. Of course, nothing can truly be permanent forever and ever, but this now is an expectation this will be integrated into what schools do when they find that a child or group of children is falling behind. They will consider, because this has been researched and seen to work, that this will be part of what they will put in place in their schools. And then the Education Endowment Foundation, which has been a key player in the research, in the sharing of best practice. This is now going to have a secure footing with the DFE and will ensure that what works, evidence-based research, is part of what goes forward. So we keep learning, keep sharing consistently with every school around the country. So everybody gets the benefit of those things that actually work. What this should mean for children and young people, and I appreciate the detail on this slide may be a little small for you to read, but this is about bringing all of that together. So making sure that everyone is clear in their role, including the work that you might be doing collectively, collaboratively with other organisations, including the local authority. The school here is key in identifying those pupils and making sure that they get extra support. And the SENCO, the Special Education Needs Coordinator, the expectation that Steve's already outlined, that they have access to an MPQ qualification, and therefore they are more aware of what strategies might help individual and groups of children. There is a notion here of a free holiday club, which is supported by a meal, where children who are behind, and you'll recall that there was some notions of this last summer, where there were opportunities for children to have catch up in the summer holidays. So again, this is part of that pledge. If this works, this would be offered, and this would not come at a cost to the child's family. Assessment systems in school are used to aid teachers in identifying those children in their class that would benefit from more help, and that those day-to-day teachers are trained, aware of, have information shared with them by the SENCO and from the research from the Education Endowment Foundation about what might work for individual children and groups of children, so that everybody benefits, and that there will be parents will be more aware of when their children are falling behind, how they're doing in their learning. And certainly this is an aspect that my school has recently considered very seriously, not because of the white paper, but because of parents being a little bit more anxious about how well their children are doing post-pandemic. and we've introduced a more frequent reporting system, a report card, if you like. Again, this is about making sure parents are involved in their children's learning. And then a very important area here around mental health and about children who may suffer in their learning because of their well-being concerns. So additional support for children to manage their own emotions and to be able to get support for themselves within school, so that their attendance is able to continue. There is a special educational needs green paper out at the moment, and that picks up on some of these strands as well.
Linda, there are quite a number of questions on the panel at the moment about the holiday club one. Again, very little in the white paper in terms of detail on this. I mean, my understanding and my reading of it is that these schemes exist at the moment. I think it's actually about the level of funding. And of course, that's the big unknown, because there are no sums of money on most of these proposals within the white paper. The big question will be to what extent. But these summer camps or summer clubs, whatever they're called, in your area, are available, and a lot of them are funded by government and have been for a number of years. That's usually limited fund. It has to be bid for. Quite what happens to that in terms of size going forward, I'm afraid we don't know at this point in time.
And I think that's where, as you said at the top of the session, Steve, a lot of this is already happening. There is an intention, I suspect, to bring what works together, but I don't identify anything as entirely new. They might have thought about how it's actually working and presented it in a slightly different way. But as you say, Steve, these holiday clubs have been identified by schools for many years. And they have revision clubs in the Easter holidays for children approaching their public examinations. These are not new things, and schools have often gone the extra mile in the past and laid these on because there is a need rather than because there is funding. But of course, this is saying there is a pledge around this, and therefore there needs to be a little bit more clarity about what that means for schools. And that detail simply isn't there in that level yet, is my understanding. So let's look at what this what implications there are here for governance. There isn't a definition of what falling behind means, and that's why I used that term, finding their learning more challenging, because that's the terminology that we use in our governing board about when we're talking about those children who for one reason or another find their learning more difficult. So are we using a common language here is probably my first question. And what is it that in your boards, when you talk to your head teacher and senior leaders, when you look at the data, when you talk about your vulnerable groups, how does your school define falling behind, and therefore has that identified, and what support is being put in place? These are not new conversations. You will be having these conversations because that's what governance has always been about. But if there is a further definition that will come out as we move forward to say, against those targets, which are going to be quite challenging for some schools, what does falling behind actually mean in comparison to those targets, then we'll need to start thinking about that in a little bit more deeper way, and what support in our schools is able to be put in place to meet some of that gap. There was an announcement on the 2nd of May by the Secretary of State, again as part of this pledge to parents, saying that any child that's falling behind, again, the definition is important here, will have, is having a promise that they will have data released to them to show how their school has used the National Tutoring Programme. And further on, it says that there is enough money in the current programme to fund one tutoring course for each pupil premium child. So the implication there is that that should be the priority. but they are also aware that there are some schools that are not using it. Now, you may well be a school that has tried to use it and found it's quite difficult to navigate around. And Steve and I were having a conversation around this. The schools that he's involved with have found it very difficult. The school where I'm a governor has been successful, and it has had positive impact. But they're going to simplify the way the funding reaches schools, and they're going to provide in 22-23 the funding direct to schools. So, and also there is in that announcement contacting schools that have not engaged with that, so to make sure that every school is aware and has considered using it. And then this goes alongside that data promise to parents, so parents can say, well, I understand the government has said my child's entitled to this. How are you engaging with it as a school? So I think there is something there that we need to consider carefully in building our knowledge as a board. What is it that our school is doing, and what are the problems if it's not working as well as it should be?
I think there's possibly another call for action here, Linda. Apologies, I didn't put this on the slide earlier, but I think from my perspective, I think there's probably for all governors to actually talk to their schools and say the government is actually going to be following this up with all schools anyway, but there is also the, they're going to be publishing, sorry, I realize there's a typo here as well, it should be data, so almost a league table of who's using and who isn't, and lots of schools, because we've got a question on the panel at the moment from Sandra about how is the government going to improve the supply and the sourcing of tutors. Lots of schools have struggled, not just with the administration of the funding of the programme, but with actually getting those tutors, as Linda said. One of the schools that I'm chair, we have actually paid our own staff to do it because we couldn't find anybody else. So I think there are ways around it, but my suggestion in terms of the call to action is that all governors should be having conversations in their schools this term to say, where are we on the tutor program? Are we using it? If not, what would actually facilitate us using it? Because we will be held to account. And I think the government is actually structuring this in the way that is actually meaning that a lot of parents and carers potentially could end up putting pressures on schools saying, well, where's the tutoring for my child? What are you doing for my child? And the whole sort of nuancing of the white paper, I think, is pushing it in that direction. So for me, this is a bit of forewarned is forearmed, I think.
Thank you, Steve. And then again, I think this is not a new question. How much use does my school or trust currently make of evidence in planning? When we were agreeing our pupil premium strategy in the autumn term last year, you were a governor at that time, there was a requirement that we would consider how our school is making use of the evidence of what works in planning that strategy and putting that in place. And this is about continuing this drive for using that evidence in planning what will actually take place in our schools. So again, it's about continually, as a governing body, improving our knowledge and assuring through the questions and the discussions that we have that our school is making the best use of those things that have been researched to be effective. So the last of these themes from the white paper is the one that probably has got the biggest headline news, and this is the government's expectation, and this is a quote directly from the white paper itself, not our words, that by 2030 all children will benefit from being taught in a family of schools with their school in a strong multi-academy trust or with plans to join or form one. So this, again, it's controversial. We have to think about some of how we will define what a strong multi-academy trust is and what the incentive or not will be to join a trust. If currently your results are good and you're working well, what will be the driver? How will you decide? And many trusts, I'm part of a multi-academy trust. I know Steve governs in schools that are part of a trust. How will this growth be planned to be successful and to be proportionate, so that this is a smooth transition? So what is the background behind that? They're now suggesting that any school that receives 2 Ofsted inspection judgments of requires improvement, so that's as a standard of education in that school for 2 successive cycles, has been less than good, that will equal a move into an academy. Again, as part of this levelling up expectation, there's 55 education investment areas being created and 24 priority education investment areas. These recognise as areas where schools are not doing as well as other parts of the country, and therefore further investment into those areas to support them, to make sure that those children get the opportunity to be in front of a good teacher every day, because it relies, as we said back at the beginning, in the first 2 chapters, on excellent teaching and good attendance. So making sure that the teaching and the curriculum is appropriate, and these areas have been identified through research to require additional support. And then finally, and again, there is not detail of this yet, how the opportunity for local authorities to be able to bring together groups of schools and be part of creating mats in those areas. They won't be able to run them, but they will be able to help shape and form those. There is not detail of how that will occur. And again, the Queen's speech didn't give us any more information about that. So what are the implications here for full governance? Well, 2030 is still a long way off. In terms of education and politics, we may have different policies, we may even have a different government by that point. This again has been a long-held intention that schools will be a part of academy trusts. This is just putting another date to it and making clear that that intention has not gone away. We may have not talked about in our own school for a long time this idea of academisation, and this white paper may have brought that conversation to the fore again, and we may have those conversations in our board about what that might look like. But we do not need to rush at this. It does not need to be something that we decide in the immediate future. There is time to consider what will happen, particularly if we're a local authority maintained school. I think our local authorities, if they have capacity, will maybe have some debate and discussion around what they believe they want to do with their locally maintained schools. If we are a small multi-academy trust or a standalone academy, we may already have some understanding about what our growth plans might be. And again, I think it's about stepping back, thinking about our own ethos and thinking about, let's see a little bit more detail about what this looks like. And there is plenty of time to make very far-reaching decisions, and making sure that we get them right is really our responsibility as a board. And alongside that, the debate will continue for some time. Local Government Association research, and on Tuesday, the NAHT, National Association of Head Teachers, indicated their opposition to this Forced Academy programme. So it's about stepping back, looking at what's happening, being clear about what the ethos and the vision for your school is, and then being aware and available to have discussions that allow that due diligence to take place as and when.
Linda, there are quite a few questions on this one, not altogether surprising, I guess, but lots of people asking questions about academisation. Again, I think our advice at the moment would be, let's wait and see when more detail actually appears. We don't know the finer details on the local authority options for creating maps, but of course we have to bear in mind that many local authorities up and down the country, not all of them, but an awful lot of them, have reduced their school improvement arm. So it calls into question whether they actually have the capacity to do this anyway. Some will, but many won't. I think that we've got quite a few questions as well have come up about standalone academies. Again, the implication in the white paper, or the ambition in the white paper, is that every school the government would like to see in a strong multi-academy trust. One of the schools where I'm chair happens to be a standalone trust. We've already had a visit earlier on, sorry, it was last term now, not this term, in the spring term, from the Department for Education asking us what our intentions are. We happen to be part of a local, I think, cooperation agreement, if you like, of 5 other schools, and we don't spend any money on it. It's actually all done for support of each other, mutual support at the moment. So we said that we have no intention, we don't want to, and I think I can see quite a few people on the panel coming up with similar statements there. I think there will be more to be said. The Local Government Association research is trying to demonstrate that actually maintained schools perform better in Ofsted inspections in the last 2 years than academies did. The NAHT is actually saying that I think it's 75% was the figure, if I remember rightly, Linda, of their members don't want to be forced to academize. And again, I think one has to put this into context. Most of the white paper is about improving children and young people's outcomes, or either directly or indirectly. This is very much about a government philosophy, a government policy, which is about structural change. This isn't actually about improving schools per se, although there will be claims on both sides about it. So our advice would certainly be to watch and wait. And there's an interesting comment on the panel from Martin, who's saying in a school that he clerks, the board there are feeling that they have to do something. I would say that review it, look at what the options are, but until it's clearer and until it's actually a compulsion to do it, nobody should actually be forced to rushing into this at the moment. There's a lot of scaremongering, a lot of rumour milling going on at the moment, but 2030, as Linda says, is a long time away. We have a general election in 2024. None of us knows quite what the outcomes and quite what the impact of that will be.
And there's nobody is compelling you to do it this year. That's the important thing here. I think a lot of the comments that I'm seeing on the panel at the moment, there is a fear of something happening that a school may not wish to be part of, and this is what due diligence is all about. This is about waiting and seeing. You wouldn't make a decision about any other major thing in your life without all of the information in front of you and all of the options, and you would choose the option that best met your ethos and vision. And this is exactly the same here. Nobody's making us do it today, so there is plenty of time to look at what is happening and to make carefully considered decisions if they are needed and when they are appropriate. So alongside the white paper itself, there were some additional documents. There was a further document called the Case for a Fully Trust-Led System, which outlines the government's thinking around that. But again, a lot of the detail, as we've just said, is not there. That is also accompanied by a paper on the financials of that particular of the white paper itself, meeting those ambitions, setting out what that looked like in terms of funding. There is also a very short document on the methodology they've used for targets for the GCSE grades for English and maths. I don't know if you wanted to say any more about any of those documents, Steve. They really don't tell any more of the story than we've already heard.
No, absolutely. And I think the one that I would say the green one, the second one in the Case for a Fully Trust-Led System, again, this isn't supposed to be a political point, but just a little bit of a health warning on that. It is very much putting the government's argument forward. There's a lot of evidence or things that the government is saying is evidence at the moment. This, I think, is probably what has been the catalyst for the NAHT, National Association of Head Teachers survey, and also the Local Government Association research as well. This argument is going to rumble on. There's no doubt about this at all.
And then finally, we just wanted to talk a little bit about the Queen's speech, which was May the 11th, and the introduction of a draft schools bill. Again, there's not huge amounts of information that we can share with you. And I know that people are really wanting detail. We don't have that at the moment. And I think it'll be a little while before we do. But some of the themes from the schools bill: tighter regulation of academy trusts, because if we want strength, we want all academy trusts to be good ones. The support for more schools to become academies is definitely part of their route. And I think there is a drive, certainly from parents, to have some kind of common sense approach that says, well, I don't know what all of these different types of schools actually mean anymore. And some of that has been informed by that parent voice, I believe. Reform to the legal framework for attendance, and they're promising a new attendance policy. There is, and has been for some years, again, a lot of this is not new, as we've already said a number of times, children who are not at school, somewhere following up those children, establishing a register, and expanding the way in which local authorities support those children who are homeschooled. So a little bit more support and understanding of how those children are being educated, and in making sure that those concerns around safeguarding are also covered, because where they're not, any child that is not in school has an eyes off approach from anyone who may be concerned about an aspect of their life. And they're going to expand the registration requirements for independent schools for exactly the same reason. And then there is an indication that they will strengthen teacher misconduct regime, although we're not sure what has led to that, but they're going to give the Teaching Regulation Agency powers to investigate misconduct. So again, no real detail about any of these items, but these are the things that that were covered in the Queen's speech. So that brings us to an end, or to the end of what we had to share with you this morning. Steve, I don't know if there are any other questions that are either on the board or that you wanted to share with the rest of the audience before we finish.
No, I think we've answered all of the questions that came on the board. If we haven't actually read your question out and have answered it by typing the answer into the box, I hope that's done. If there are any questions that we haven't done, and as always, we will actually review all the questions again afterwards, and we'll get back to you electronically. But just to end the session, folks, by saying thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. This is something that's actually going to go forward. As I say, we've literally had 24 hours to look at the schools bill. It will become an Education Act. It's called a bill because it's not actually gone through Parliament yet, of course. And I dare say these are topics that will actually come back up in future webinars. So I think watch this space is the main advice. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. As I say, come back and join us again for the next time we come to support Governors for Schools with a webinar. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. The sun is shining where I am, so I hope it is where you are as well. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.